but he had the largest collection of books than any black person in Charleston at that time. So from there, he would lend out books to anybody who came to his residence because he believed in the importance of education. After he died in 1915, his daughter, Susan Dark Butler, went on to take his collection to the next level and started a reading room on Cracker Street, which of course later moved on to Upper King Street. And that is known today as the John L. Dark Library. And that was the legacy he made. And the legacy of Dr. Alonzo McClellan, along with that of Mrs. Anna DaCosta Banks, who once said, the colored people have, using the language of that time, have long felt the need for a hospital where their sick can be properly cared for. Many of them have died for want of attention. The important thing to understand about people such as John Dark and Dr. McClellan and the great nurse, Miss Anna DaCosta Banks, who upon her death, the Ladies Benevolent Association said in 1930, all ages, races, and classes may call her blessed, is that these people did not get on the grapevine or social media of that time and go around saying, whoa, woe is we. No, they got out and they did something. They saw the need for education in Charleston, so they built schools. They saw the need for the proper care of the sick in Charleston, so they built the McClellan Banks Hospital. And so the thing of that, there's a great important lesson for that to us today, that when things get rough, even in conditions as bad as they were in those days, they got up and did. And that's an important legacy to us today. And it's because of people like Ms. Anna DaCosta Banks that we have the Black Heritage Association today. Ladies, please give yourselves a hand.
Yeah.
Something that always gets lost in this equation. Why did you have to go through conditions such as what happened to Frazier Baker, Jim Crow, slavery? How did all that stuff get started? That's something people see. The important thing to understand about all of that is that before you can find a cure, you have to find a cause, as every good nurse knows, right or wrong. So what was the cause of all of this? Here's the story. In West Africa, you had the Ghana and the Mali and the Songhai empires about 500 years ago. And the Songhai was the greatest of them all. It was run by a man named Askia Muhammad, who in the year 1500 ruled as much land as there is in the modern day United States. But then, of course, as with every great empire that has come before it, just as Newton said in the law of gravity, what goes up must come down. Egypt rose, Egypt fell. Rome rose, Rome fell, and so on and so forth. So, Askia Muhammad had these trifling sons who envied their father's wealth. And when the old man went blind in 1528, his greedy sons exiled him. And for the next 50 years, they fought over the throne. Meanwhile, the Sultan of Morocco saw the great wealth of Songhai. And so while these evil, greedy sons were fighting against each other, he invited one of the sons to say, hey, look, if you ask your brothers, I'll help take over the kingdom and share it with you. And this silly son listened. And as a result of that, in the year 1591, the kingdom of Songhai was destroyed, as well as the great scholars of that region were imprisoned. Why did they imprison the scholars? Very simple. Cut off the head and the body will die. And there's a way to fix that, which I'll get to a little bit later. So then, while this is going on, Columbus is doing his thing in the Caribbean. And while he's doing his thing, they were enslaving the people we now call the American Indian. And there was a Spanish priest along with him by the name of Bartolomé La Casa, who told Columbus, this is evil what you're doing to the American Indians. This must stop. So he came up with a solution. Instead of enslaving the American Indian, go to Africa and enslave the blacks. Because by this time, the Portuguese were already doing that, sending them to Brazil to clean out the forests and all that. And that's why Brazil has more black people than anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere now. So with the empire on its downhill slide, they went to enslave the Africans. Okay? So then while this is happening, also in America, you had the white indentured servants. These were poor white people who arranged to work for white masters for 7 years. And after they served 7 years, they would be given land and property and be set free. However, they had a problem with that. In colonial Virginia, those poor whites and those enslaved African Americans were getting a little too chummy for the powers that be. And a man named Nathaniel Bacon in 1676 decided to have Bacon's Rebellion, where the two groups would join together and overthrow the power structure of Virginia. And when the power structure of Virginia saw that, they said, "Oh, no, we can't have that again." So what they did was to poison the minds of the poor whites against the blacks, to keep that from ever happening again. To poison the minds of the poor whites with racism, to keep them from uniting with the blacks, who had more in common than anybody cared to admit. And of course with that, the blacks would resent the whites. So guess what? The people who were the planter class would still stay on top. And from that day to this, people who have seen through that and have tried to bring the two groups together have been either vilified or killed. But in spite of all of that, in spite of undereducating the African Americans, so that you would have this permanent class of cheap labor, because that's what this is really all about for us. In spite of that, there were some who said, we aren't having that. There was a great lady who lived down the street from us, who was born over on Henrietta Street in 1898. As a little girl, she witnessed the Charleston riot of 1919. And she saw a group of white sailors. They were basically hanging, and they lynched two African Americans, Isaac Doctor and William Brown. Why? Because a black man had taken money from them to buy liquor, but he never showed up with the liquor. And so they went on a rampage, burning and looting, and they lynched these two men who I talked about. They went past Marion Square, went past the Sparks house, and they made a stupid mistake. They went to the east side. And those folks on the east side said, boy, no! They weren't having that. The mayor, Tristan Hyde, called out not the National Guard, but the Marines when she found out they were on the east side, because those folks shot back. And after all of that was over with, the Marines came, and the mayor appointed a biracial commission so that this wouldn't happen again. The young lady who was a teacher was on that commission. Her name was Miss Septima Poinsett Clark, who lived right there on President Street, not far from where we are today. And in spite of getting fired from the school board for being a member of the NAACP, she went throughout the Deep South, teaching illiterate adults how to read, write, register to vote, and take charge of their lives. And one of the students he taught was a young man from Kwanzaa who never went past the 4th grade, but owned several businesses that a couple still exist today. And in spite of his lack of education, went from selling vegetables and such to going on to becoming Martin Luther King's right-hand man right here in Charleston. His granddaughter is right over here with us. Jackie? Okay, I'm speaking here, the greatest Mr. Esau Bench. Give that big name. So you see, in spite of the difficulties we face today, we have many examples to draw from as the people who have overcome things. Instead of, if they were around today, you have these people, they get on Facebook, they get this anger out of their system on the keyboard, these keyboard activists and Facebook militants, and they go home and everything stays the same. No. They did stuff. And that's one of the important lessons we have to teach to our children. But not everyone is a scholar. How is this done? Well, one way is definitely not through Facebook and things like that, because you have a lot of people putting out misinformation on Facebook and all these bootleg DVDs that you get from the barbershop filled with misinformation and all of that. No, you need real scholarship to deal with that. But how do you do that? Well, get this. These great people who I just mentioned are gone, but their teachings are still with us. If you go to the Avery Research Center, they have papers of Mr. Jenkins and Miss Clark and Dr. Dent and Reverend Daniel Jenkins and all these other great folks who have done great things in the city. Great people such as Dr. King, Malcolm, Medgar Evers, and over in South Africa, Steve Biko. He wrote a book called I Write What I Like. Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, and all of them. They all left behind their stories, their teachings, and their instructions. So this is what we have to do. In our churches, the Christian preachers understand that although Christ himself is no longer physically walking around us in human form on this earth, his teachings have been preserved. So the ministers of the Christian churches teach his teachings from the Bible so that the people will know that. The Jewish rabbis know that their great prophets are no longer with us. So they preach in the synagogues the teachings from the Torah. The Muslims know that the Prophet Muhammad is no longer walking among us today in human form. So they teach his teachings from the Holy Quran. So with that being said, we have these teachings of our great leaders. Those of us who are scholars, those of us who like to go to libraries, those of us who love to read, we have a duty of taking those teachings out to the general public so that they can know these great teachings of our ancestors, so they will not be led astray in the future, so they will be inspired. So why is this necessary? Let me tell you why. One of the darkest moments in South Carolina history came also in 1898. Up near Greenwood, South Carolina, you had what was known as the Phoenix Massacre, where African Americans who were trying to vote were massacred. And a young man was walking down with his father. And the lynch mob came by and made the father take off his hat and bow down to them in front of the son. And the son said, one day he will do what he could to put a stop to these type of things. The son went on to graduate from South Carolina State. And then he went on to graduate from college in Maine. And then he went on to become the president of Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. By 1935, he went over to India to meet Mohandas Gandhi. Why? Because Gandhi was doing what he can to free the people of India. So he went over to India with a delegation and said, Gandhi, please come to America and help your black brothers do the same thing you're trying to do in India. And Gandhi said, well, I would love to do that, but I have to make what I'm trying to do work here before I can do it anywhere else. But it may be through your people in America that the world will understand what my philosophy was all about. He didn't get that. But 13 years later, he told that story to his class at Morehouse College. And an 18-year-old young man heard that message and was inspired to take that message to the next level. The man who did that talking was Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. And the young man who listened was Martin Luther King. And you know the rest of that story. So, okay. But that's important because that's important on a number of levels. Shakespeare said, it is always darkness before the dawn. And out of the darkness of the Phoenix Massacre came the light that led Martin Luther King to do what he did. And that is important because there may be, among some of these young people here, a young person who is listening to this that might get the inspiration to take these teachings on to the next level and our level of freedom. So that is why messages like this are so important, and this is why things like this are necessary to get us off of that train of self-pity and defeatism and on a new train that will take us up to the next level. And as Curtis Mayfield best put it like this: Thank you.